As you all know, since 2010, covering the 2009 year, the City Controller's Office has produced the annual annual financial report. It is the digestible version of the annual comprehensive financial report that comes out on or before May 1st of every year. So that is the impetus for this. It's just the opportunity to present the work that has gone into this and the work that our office does throughout the year. This is glossy. It's intended to be for broad consumption, and it contains more information about general city services, city programming, city organizations that you don't find in the annual, in the ACVR. But I think what folks are mostly here for is to hear about some mid-year updates, including mid-year overtime figures, which our office has continued to monitor. So we'll start today with mid-year finances, and I have some bright spots, right? Real estate tax revenue is up. It's currently at $1.3 million higher than this time last year, and real estate taxes could end with a $3 to $4 million increase over prior years and budget. Earned income continues to outpace 2024. It's currently at $1.5 million above last year with a potential year-end increase of $4.5 million. This will not be above the budgeted amount of $145 million. Licenses and fees are up considerably from last year as well, currently at $35 million, which, if trends continue, will end the year at $59 million. Revenue that is significantly down from last year. Amusement is down $1.6 million. Deed transfer is down considerably at $4 million, which is symbolic of the macro trends that we're seeing in the economy. People are less likely to be moving right now because of what's happening in the real estate market and with the economy more broadly. And as anticipated, interest earnings are nearly half of what they were at the same time last year. A lot of that has to do with the American Rescue Plan. We have spent down nearly all of the $335 million. We have a little under $10 million left in that trust fund. All of that money has been encumbered and it cannot be reallocated per federal guidelines. Expenditures. At the expenditure on the departmental level, the city has spent more than it spent last year at this time. We have spent $24 million more in 2025 than in 2024 when you do not account for debt service. And as a reminder, we are not going to get a $50 million deposit from the American Rescue Plan. I want to repeat that. We have spent $24 million more in 2025 than we spent in 2024 as of June 30th. That is a significant increase and unsustainable, and that number does not include the debt service figure. Now I'm going to go through some trust fund balances. These are, again, going to be high-level ones that have been in the news lately. If people have detailed questions of ones that I don't have available, we can get those figures to you. The Stop the Violence account, and again, these figures are as of 6/30. The Stop the Violence Trust Fund has a cash balance of $15.6 million. The Parks Tax Trust Fund has a cash balance of $2.3 million. And as I mentioned, the American Rescue Plan Trust Fund has a cash balance of about $9.8 million. The city has spent, again, all of this money was encumbered, $3.2 million of the American Rescue Plan Trust Fund so far in Q1 and Q2. $1 million went to the URA for OWN PGH, which is the Affordable Home Ownership Program, and about $1.1 million went to PWSA for their ongoing work for lead line replacement. There were more minor distributions that I'm happy to go into if people have questions. Mid-year premium pay. As of June 30th, 2025, the city has spent 77% of its general fund premium pay budget for the year. 2025 overtime premium pay is outpacing 2024 premium pay with $3 million more spent as of June 30th, even though the budget for 2025 premium and overtime pay is lower. To summarize that, in 2024, the city budgeted just over $40 million for premium pay, but spent more than $66 million. In 2025, we budgeted less at $38 million, and we have already spent $29 million. This is not a one-time line item overspend. This is a deeper issue tied to staffing shortages and operational strain. I know when our initial report came out at the end of Q1, there was conversation around specific events, specifically the St. Patrick's Day Parade. The St. Patrick's Day Parade happens every year. It's an operational event. So now we're looking at storm recovery. The April 29th storm, that pay period with overtime was an increase of about $100,000 from the pay period prior. So again, overtime should be something that is for emergency expenses. It should not be used for general operations. We have spent the last 20 years creating a fund balance, our rainy day fund, which is at $200 million to account for and to address city emergencies like that April 29th storm. That money should not be used for general operating. It should not be used for things that we can predict. It is for those once-in-a-lifetime storms or once-in-a-10-year storm. And, you know, given the fact that we are budgeted to spend 70% of our $200 million fund balance over the course of the next 5 years is quite concerning. With that, I just do want to flag with the storm on the 29th of April, Public Works saw that increase during the pay period of the storm, particularly in operations. There is an 8-page summary that we distributed to the mayor and city council earlier today. Public safety did not see an increase in the aggregate of the storm, although fire and EMS, OT, and premium pay were higher than their 2025 biweekly average. But police were significantly lower during the 2025 weekly average, which you can attribute to there were almost no events, there were no public gatherings, there was not much going on during that 2-week period where police would be called out for an emergency because of people's limited ability to leave and move with mobility. So with that, I'm happy to take questions and have a conversation, anything anyone needs, wants more clarification on.
Can you elaborate a little on your concerns about pulling down the rainy day fund? Where does that leave us in 5 years, and what could we realistically do to try to mitigate some of that impact?
So the rainy day fund is for just that, rainy days, right? And we had a storm on the 29th. I'm not trying to be kitschy, but that is what it's for. It's for emergencies. It's for COVID. We had a drastic and literally overnight downturn in city revenue during the pandemic in 2022 and into 2021. We saw a drastic decline in revenue in 2020 and 2021 in light of the pandemic, right? There are going to be events that require us to draw from that account, and whether it is a literal storm or a global pandemic or whatever we can't predict a year from now. But what we should be doing is budgeting appropriately to make sure that we're using, our operating budget is going towards operations and the rainy day fund is being used for emergencies. And, that what's happening downtown, could that constitute an emergency in terms of the drastic and, cuts in real estate? Perhaps. But that doesn't mean that the city shouldn't be focusing on places to grow and on cost containment where it can. And I don't think those have been conversations that have been had in earnest in the last few years.
How do you characterize the city's financial situation? You're saying
precarious.
You're saying that it's not a crisis, but it's unsustainable. How would you characterize it?
I'd say we're in a precarious financial situation. I do think that we need to have a plan for cost containment, and we need to have a plan for revenue growth. I mean, there are bright spots, like real estate revenue did rebound in Q2 compared to Q1. That's a bright spot. But at the same time, we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to grow our local economy. We do well when people are moving here and universities are hiring. And there are macro trends particularly on the federal level, and we had this conversation on May 1st when everyone was here. And, cuts to research and Medicare and Medicaid are going to impact our local economy. That is absolutely going to happen. And what can the city do to mitigate against that? And part of it is going to be diversifying our economy. And the AI conference that happened last week is a great example of that. And, I appreciate the political differences I had with a lot of people that were in the room, but at the same time, if that is going to grow our local tax base and create jobs and create opportunities for people to relocate to the city of Pittsburgh, I think that's great news. And I think we should do everything we can to facilitate that growth and to encourage it. And I also think we need to be candid and have honest conversations about what we can do about cost containment. What programs and priorities should we hit pause on, or should we delay? We have a fleet that's in a dire situation. We have staffing crises across several of our public safety bureaus, and that's where we need to be investing rather than in, programming that perhaps isn't necessary for general operations.
How can real estate taxes be up if we've lost half of our assessments downtown?
The city doesn't act, to my knowledge, and this is done by the city solicitor's office, but the city doesn't actively engage in challenging reassessments when the school district does. So we've actually we've actually recouped a significant loss from downtown in the East End. The school district challenges almost every property transaction when there's a sale in the East End. The school district is very active in challenging those reassessments. Downtown is down considerably. There's a slide for that. I forgot about the deck. But we are still mitigating against downtown, and that is going to continue to hurt year over year. I think, we're at least 3 to 5 years away from feeling the bottom of the downtown reassessments. But downtown is 25% of all taxable city land, which the East End has done well in terms of families coming and going, and those sales and reassessments have benefited our overall real estate portfolio.
You mentioned the idea of hitting pause on programs. Can you give me examples?
This office is not a budgeting office, but what I will say is when you look at, I'll bring up the water fountains. We need to make sure that the city is handling its basic functions, keeping people safe and keeping things clean before it tackles other, more complicated and nuanced public policy initiatives. We're a municipal government, and our job is to keep people safe and keep things clean. And anything that doesn't fall within those two issue areas, if you will, I think needs to be evaluated to see if it should be programming that should be pursued, paused, or what should happen with it moving forward. And I also think that ongoing conversation, and every person that stood at this podium has talked about voluntary payments from nonprofits. Those conversations need to resume. And to my understanding, they haven't happened for the last 3 years. And we need to have a relationship with our large employers in this city, particularly ones who don't pay property taxes. And when you're in active litigation against them, you're not going to hit a point where you're, engaging in conversation about voluntary payments towards city operations.
Talk a little bit more about the increase in the earned income tax.
We don't, because of the way we evaluate it, the aggregate data won't come in until the end of the year, but it is a good sign, right? People who are working in the city and living in the city are making more. And that's a good sign and for the local economy. But beyond that, until we see like the end of the year with the EIT and the $52 with the local services tax, we won't be able to really tell you more of what we think that means.
Will having more police officers who just recently graduated from the academy coming on board, will that help mitigate some of the overtime costs for the police department?
I hope so. The conversation, and I said this at the controller's office budget hearing toward the end of last year, I think it was in November or December, but the overtime budget for police was just totally skewed, right? And when you changing an overtime budget doesn't change the need for overtime unless you make operational changes to the staffing structure, right, into what's needed and where. And I'm not a public safety professional. I work in the controller's office. But what I will tell you is, from what I understood from our public safety bureaus and our men and women that work in those fields, is that no operational changes were made that would explain those drastic changes in budgeted overtime. So I hope and would assume that the new police officers who are coming will help mitigate against the costs in police overtime, and also the physical and emotional strain that it takes to work forced overtime on an ongoing basis.
You have a couple different projections here for what could happen with the premium pay. Can you kind of walk us through these?
Sure. Jamie, do you want to come up too? Sorry to put you on the spot. This is my colleague, Jamie Zala. She's the Chief Accounting Officer for the city. And we're looking at page, I think, 7, projected. Yeah. So basically, I can start too.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So if things stay on the current trajectory with the month-over-month average spend on overtime and premium pay, the upper chart is where we'll be, and that's at $20 million. If the budgeted pace, if operational changes happen tomorrow, and the budgeted pace, which is month over month from the budget, were to start as of July 1st, and pays we get paid every other week, so it doesn't fall necessarily cleanly in the 30th or 31st of the month, but if that occurred and operational changes were made and we just fell within budget, we'd still be $10 million over in 2025 with overtime.
And that has to come out of the rainy day fund, right?
So the question I would ask with the rainy day fund at this point is, how are we doing in terms of spending compared to last year, and where are we in terms of revenue compared to last year? And the answer is, we're spending a lot more than we did last year. We do not have American Rescue Plan dollars, and because of how the city budgets, we don't, it's not like we go over and take money out of that account and move it into this account. There's a reconciliation process that happens at the end of the year. And because the city, our office and the city as a whole uses GAAP accounting, instead of, these are all cash basis figures, so this is money in and money out. That's when you would see the difference in the rainy day fund, not until the end of the year. But the bigger question, the question I think you're asking is this sustainable, and where will we get this money if we don't have it? And yes, ultimately, that's where the money's gonna come from if we can't cover it through general revenue. And at the pace we're spending, that is correct. We will end up having to pull from that. And that is in the budget too, that we'll have to pull from the rainy day fund for operations in 2025.